In Japan, behavior is not guided first by warning signs or raised voices, but by an inner weight carried quietly within. Long before the law appears, something gentler yet firmer intervenes. Awareness of others, sensitivity to impact, reluctance to disturb the shared rhythm of life. This is not fear of punishment, but inherited attentiveness shaped by language, family, and memory. Here, shame does not shout. It whispers, guiding choices in silence. To understand Japan, one must listen closely to that whisper, the unseen force shaping actions when no one is watching, and guiding society across generations without commands or enforcement. In Japan, behavior is shaped long before police, courts, or penalties come into view. What guides people first is an internal governor, formed quietly through upbringing, language, and shared expectation. From the Edo period, 1603–1868, village life depended on mutual responsibility, where disturbing harmony invited social unease rather than formal punishment. Over time, this produced a culture where individuals monitor themselves instinctively. Rules feel quiet because they live inside people, not on walls. Shame operates as an inner signal, alerting a person before action becomes disruption. This unseen law does not demand obedience aloud. It encourages restraint through awareness of how one's behavior echoes outward. Because of this internal system, Japan requires fewer visible warnings to maintain order. Instructions are minimal, voices remain low, and enforcement feels distant. People line up, apologize quickly, and correct mistakes without being prompted. This does not mean laws are weak. Rather, they are rarely needed at the first stage. Social harmony, or WA, becomes the guiding principle, reinforced daily through small acts of consideration. By the early 20th century, as Japan modernized its legal codes, this internal discipline already existed. The law formalized boundaries, but shame continued to manage behavior long before boundaries were crossed. What looks like obedience is often self-regulation. In many other Asian societies, authority takes a more visible role. In China, especially after the mid-20th century reforms of 1949, compliance leaned heavily on state presence, regulation, and surveillance. In South Korea, rapid industrialization after the 1960s emphasized hierarchy and institutional discipline. In India, colonial-era legal structures from the 19th century left enforcement largely external. These systems function, yet they rely more on oversight than inner restraint. Japan followed a different path. Here, the invisible law works quietly, shaping conduct before rulebooks open. It is not louder than written law, but earlier, and often more effective. Across generations in Japan, shame operates in layers, forming what can be described as cultural DNA rather than personal emotion alone. This DNA is learned early and reinforced quietly, shaping how individuals monitor themselves. The first layer is personal shame, rooted in self-awareness. It is the moment someone realizes they have failed their own standard before anyone else reacts. This inward signal appears quickly, often accompanied by silence or apology, because the discomfort comes from within. Over centuries, especially during the Edo period when social stability depended on predictable conduct, this internal awareness became a behavioral inheritance. Shame here is not theatrical. It is intimate, private, and deeply tied to one's sense of responsibility. Beyond the self lies social shame, which emerges when one's actions inconvenience or burden others. In Japan, causing trouble, known as meiwaku, carries significant emotional weight. This form of shame activates when behavior disrupts shared rhythm, whether in workplaces, neighborhoods, or families. The individual feels accountable not only for the act, but for the ripple it creates. This explains why apologies are frequent and immediate. Public embarrassment hurts more than fines because money cannot erase disruption. Fines end transactions, while shame demands repair. By the early 20th century, as Japan's urban population expanded, this sensitivity to disturbance became essential for coexistence, reinforcing shame as a daily regulator rather than a dramatic punishment. The deepest layer is collective shame, where failure reflects on groups rather than individuals. Schools, companies, and families absorb responsibility together, a pattern strengthened during Japan's modernization after 1868. This shared burden discourages repetition and encourages self-correction. In China and South Korea, shame often centers more strongly on reputation, rank, or visible status. Authority and hierarchy play clearer roles in enforcement. Japan's emphasis differs. The fear is not exposure, but imbalance. This distinction is crucial. Japan's shame DNA is not about being seen as bad, but about being felt as disruptive. That is why behavior adjusts quietly, long before law intervenes. In Japan, childhood is where shame becomes mental wiring rather than spoken rule. From the earliest years, correction arrives softly, often without raised voices or dramatic punishment. Parents, teachers, and elders guide behavior through suggestion, pause, and example. This style matured during the Edo period, between 1603 and 1868, when communal life required emotional restraint for survival. Children learn that disruption brings discomfort, not through fear, instead of resistance. Over time, this shapes a child who scans situations before acting, adjusting behavior quietly. Shame is introduced as guidance, not humiliation, and it becomes familiar, steady, and internal. A key skill learned early is kuki wo yomu, meaning reading the air. Children observe mood, context, and expectation before speaking or moving. Schools reinforce this through group activities, cleaning duties, and shared responsibility, especially after education reforms in the late 19th century. Correction often arrives as silence or a look, signaling misalignment without accusation. This method teaches restraint, not rebellion. Loud defiance feels uncomfortable, not empowering. The child learns to pause, adjust, and re-enter harmony. By adolescence, shame no longer feels imposed. It feels anticipatory. Behavior is shaped before mistakes occur, because the body recognizes social imbalance instantly, like a reflex learned through repetition. In other Asian societies, childhood discipline often relies more on authority and consequence. In China, especially after 1949, obedience became closely tied to institutional correction and visible rules. In South Korea, rapid development after the 1960s emphasized hierarchy, competition, and external pressure. These systems produce discipline, yet they activate fear more than internal pause. Japan's approach differs. Shame is absorbed gradually, woven into identity. By adulthood, restraint feels natural, not forced. The child who once read the air becomes an adult who self-corrects without command. This is how cultural DNA survives. It is transmitted quietly, reinforced daily, and carried forward without instruction manuals or raised voices. This pattern explains why law feels distant, because behavior has already been shaped long before authority ever needs to appear publicly within everyday Japanese social life itself. For many Japanese, when shame enters a household, it rarely stops with the individual alone. The family absorbs it quietly, often responding as a unit rather than separating themselves from the offender. This pattern has roots in pre-modern household systems formalized during the Edo period, where family reputation and responsibility were shared. Parents may bow alongside a child, spouses may apologize publicly with their partner, and elders may lower their presence without explanation. The act is not dramatic. It is restrained, deliberate, and inward-facing. Shame here is acknowledged through unity, not accusation. Silence plays a critical role in this process. Rather than confrontation or defense, families often reduce visibility. Public appearances lessen, voices soften, and explanations are minimal. This withdrawal signals internal correction taking place. The goal is not to challenge judgment, but to reflect, repair, and prevent recurrence. In many cases, words are unnecessary. The lowered posture, the bowed head, and the absence from attention communicate accountability more strongly than statements. Shame spreads inward, not outward. It tightens bonds internally while reducing friction with society. This approach reinforces self-regulation across generations, teaching children that actions echo beyond the self. In other Asian societies, family response often moves in a different direction. In parts of China, families may confront institutions directly or attempt negotiation with authorities, a pattern shaped by 20th century political structures. In South Korea, families sometimes focus on protecting status or mitigating external consequences. These reactions emphasize defense and resolution through authority. Japan's method diverges. The family does not battle the system. It aligns with it quietly. Responsibility is shared, but noise is avoided. This inward turn strengthens the cultural DNA of shame, ensuring that correction happens within the home, long before law or confrontation ever becomes necessary. Within Japanese society, the weight of a crime is measured less by violence and more by betrayal. Theft carries deep shame because it fractures trust, the invisible glue holding daily life together. Taking what is not freely given signals a failure of self-restraint, a violation felt personally by the community. Fraud and deception deepen this wound further. Lying for gain disrupts predictability, which Japanese society depends on for smooth interaction. These offenses have long histories of stigma, reinforced during the Edo period when merchants and townspeople relied heavily on honor-based exchange. Even small acts of dishonesty echo loudly because they threaten the reliability of the whole system. Sexual misconduct carries another form of heavy shame, tied not only to harm, but to the disturbance it causes within families, workplaces, and social spaces. Public revelation often leads to resignation, apology, and withdrawal, even before legal outcomes are determined. Workplace dishonor follows a similar path. Falsifying records, abusing position, or embarrassing an organization damages collective identity. In these cases, consequences unfold socially and professionally, sometimes permanently. What outsiders may see as minor infractions often feel unbearable internally. This explains why some nonviolent crimes are perceived as worse than violent ones. Violence, while serious, is viewed as a breakdown of control, while betrayal suggests a deeper moral failure. In many other societies, crime is ranked primarily by severity and physical harm. Legal systems in China, India, and parts of Southeast Asia emphasize punishment proportional to damage or threat. Shame follows conviction rather than preceding it. In Japan, the sequence reverses. Shame arrives early, reshaping outcomes before courts conclude. This difference reflects cultural DNA. Dishonor is not measured by how loud an act is, but by how deeply it unsettles trust. That is why apologies come swiftly, resignations follow exposure, and silence replaces defense. The goal is not to escape punishment, but to acknowledge rupture. In this system, the heaviest shame belongs to acts that quietly corrode confidence, because once trust weakens, the entire social rhythm begins to falter. Long before crowds gather or voices rise, Japanese society delivers punishment through absence. There are no mobs, no public shouting, no ritual humiliation. Instead, the response is measured and heavy, unfolding through distance. Social withdrawal begins almost immediately. Friends speak less. Invitations fade. Familiar spaces grow silent. This pattern has roots in communal practices shaped during the Edo period, 1603–1868, when harmony depended on minimizing friction rather than escalating blame. The offender feels the weight not through spectacle, but through isolation. Punishment is not announced, it is sensed, settling slowly into daily life. Career damage often follows, sometimes more enduring than legal outcomes. Resignations occur quickly, even before investigations conclude. Transfers, demotions, or permanent exits become common paths. Trust, once weakened, rarely returns fully. Employers, colleagues, and partners remember disruption long after paperwork ends. By the early 20th century, as corporate culture expanded alongside Japan's industrial growth, reputation became inseparable from reliability. A single breach could shadow decades of effort. This is why punishment continues after sentences end. Courts may close cases, but social memory remains active. Rehabilitation is possible, yet it is gradual and quiet, requiring patience rather than declaration. In many other countries, punishment centers on visible action. Means include jail time, public trials, or outspoken condemnation. Outrage becomes part of the process, offering release through expression. In parts of China, legal resolution carries primary authority, reinforced by state messaging. In South Korea, public scrutiny and media attention play significant roles. These systems deliver closure through conclusion. Japan follows a different rhythm. The end of a sentence does not signal the end of consequence. Social trust rebuilds slowly, if at all. This persistence explains why restraint matters so deeply. The fear is not punishment alone, but the prolonged quiet that follows. Society does not chase offenders. It steps back, allowing space to speak louder than judgment. In that silence, accountability lingers, shaping behavior long after law has finished its work. Across Japanese society, the line between shame and law is carefully maintained. Shame is expected to operate first, guiding behavior before any rule is enforced. Only when this internal system fails does formal authority appear. This understanding matured alongside Japan's legal modernization during the Meiji era, beginning in 1868, when Western-style courts and policing were introduced. Law provided structure, yet it was never intended to replace self-restraint. Police involvement signals that a deeper social mechanism has already broken down. By the time uniforms arrive, shame has lost its hold, and intervention becomes necessary rather than preventive. Legal punishment in Japan rarely stands alone. A sentence may conclude, but social memory continues quietly. Apologies, resignations, and withdrawals often occur before trials begin, showing that correction begins socially rather than legally. Once law intervenes, it formalizes accountability, but it does not erase prior judgment. This dual system creates a layered consequence. The legal process defines responsibility, while society remembers impact. Together, they form a complete response. This is why courtroom outcomes feel less dramatic than in other countries. The emotional weight has already been carried elsewhere. Law confirms what shame has already acknowledged. In many Asian states, law functions as the primary instrument of control. In China, especially after mid-20th century reforms, authority and regulation serve as the first response to disorder. In India, colonial-era legal frameworks continue to emphasize enforcement through courts and policing. In South Korea, institutional rules and public scrutiny frequently precede internal correction. These approaches rely on visible action. Japan's sequence reverses the order. Shame attempts correction first. Law enters only when that attempt fails. This distinction explains why fewer warnings are needed and why behavior often adjusts before confrontation occurs. The system does not weaken law. It preserves it, reserving enforcement for moments when internal restraint no longer functions as intended. In contemporary Japan, the same force that preserves harmony can also generate quiet strain. When shame operates continuously, without release, pressure accumulates beneath the surface. Mental health challenges linked to withdrawal and self-blame have drawn increasing attention since the late 1990s, particularly after Japan's prolonged economic slowdown. Individuals may internalize failure deeply, feeling responsible not only for outcomes, but for emotions they imagine they have caused in others. This can lead to exhaustion rather than correction. Shame, once a guide, begins to feel like weight, pressing inward without outlet. An over-apology culture has emerged alongside this pressure. Apologies appear even when fault is unclear, offered preemptively to prevent disruption. While this maintains surface calm, it can blur personal boundaries. Withdrawal becomes another risk. Some individuals step away from workplaces, education, or public life entirely, choosing absence over perceived burden. These patterns reveal a limit to internal regulation. When correction lacks balance, silence replaces participation. By the early 21st century, policymakers and educators began acknowledging that restraint without support can fracture rather than stabilize, prompting gradual discussion around mental health awareness. Younger generations increasingly question these extremes. While respect for harmony remains, Gen Z shows greater willingness to speak, set limits, and redefine responsibility. Shame still exists, but it is negotiated rather than absorbed unquestioningly. In other Asian societies, pressure often releases through visible rebellion, protest, or confrontation, especially among youth. Japan's response differs. Tension turns inward first, making strain less visible. This difference matters. It shows that shame is neither purely strength nor weakness. It is a system requiring care. When balanced, it guides behavior gently. When overloaded, it bends inward. Modern Japan stands at this intersection, learning how to preserve internal discipline without sacrificing individual well-being in the process. Across modern Japan, shame continues to function because it is efficient. Internal regulation lowers enforcement costs by reducing the need for constant supervision, policing, or correction. When people adjust behavior on their own, systems remain lighter and quieter. This pattern became especially clear during Japan's rapid reconstruction after 1945, when resources were limited and social cooperation was essential. Shame helped coordinate behavior without extensive force. It asked individuals to consider impact before action. That calculation still operates today, saving time, money, and social energy across daily life. Predictable behavior is another reason this system endures. When people anticipate one another's restraint, trust becomes practical rather than idealistic. Trains run on time not because punishment looms, but because disruption feels unacceptable. Workplaces function with fewer rules because expectations are already understood. Stability is favored over loud self-expression, not because expression is forbidden, but because balance is valued more highly. This preference developed gradually through centuries of shared living, reinforced by education reforms in the late 19th century and corporate culture in the 20th. Shame became the quiet agreement that keeps systems aligned without constant negotiation. Other Asian societies increasingly rely on law, visibility, or confrontation to manage disorder. These tools work, yet they require presence and escalation. Japan's model persists because it asks less of authority and more of awareness. The final truth is simple and enduring. Japan is not ruled by fear of law, but by awareness of impact. Shame survives because it is not loud, dramatic, or forceful. It remains because it works, shaping conduct gently, sustaining predictability, and allowing society to move forward with fewer collisions. Shame in Japan is not a relic of the past, nor a moral spectacle performed for others. It is a quiet system that lives inside behavior, guiding action before rules are spoken and before law intervenes. Across childhood, family, work, and society, this internal awareness reduces friction, preserves trust, and keeps daily life predictable. It is not perfect, and it carries pressure, yet it persists because it functions. Where many societies rely on enforcement, Japan relies on impact awareness. Understanding this cultural DNA helps explain why behavior often adjusts without confrontation, why apologies arrive early, and why consequences linger quietly after cases close. Shame here is not cruelty. It is a restraint shaped by history, language, and repetition. This is the kind of invisible structure Asia I Within exists to explore. Not stereotypes, not spectacle, but the hidden systems shaping how societies actually work. If this story changed how you see Japan, support the journey. Like the video, subscribe to Asia I Within, and share it with someone curious about culture beneath the surface. Your engagement helps bring more unseen stories to light. One chapter, one society, one hidden code at a time. Stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep looking beyond the obvious together.